Today, Bitcoin bounces back after yesterday's tumble of more than 5%. Cathie Wood's ARK Invest offloads more Coinbase shares, and Redbord of TRM Labs takes a look back at last year's court hearings and trials against some of the biggest names in the industry and discusses what to expect in 2024. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Jordan Smith. Crypto prices in the green this morning amid a volatile week for digital assets. As of noon Eastern, Bitcoin climbed nearly 3%, inching closer to $44,000. Both Ether and Solana rose about 2.5%, with Solana's Sol token crossing the $100 level once again. Crypto-focused stocks followed Bitcoin's momentum today, with Coinbase and MicroStrategy rising about 4% as of noon Eastern after being in the red yesterday. The Bitcoin miners performed even better this morning, with Marathon soaring nearly 8%. All right, let's talk about the top stories. Traders are on alert as the January 10th deadline to approve spot Bitcoin ETFs approaches. Pomp Investments founder Anthony Pompliano joined CNBC's Squawk Box this morning to discuss the various regulatory outcomes that could affect crypto trades. He addressed what's behind all the hype surrounding the potential for a spot Bitcoin ETF to launch in the US soon. He also had a warning for Wall Street investors.
Wall Street is getting invited in anticipation of the greatest show on earth, right? Bitcoin has been the best performing asset for the last 15 years, and Wall Street's basically been boxed out of it. They haven't had access to this asset. And so I think that's what you're seeing in that pent up excitement. One thing that I do caution these Wall Street investors is you can't trade this like other assets. We saw just yesterday about $1 billion of open interest got wiped out. The guys over at Reflexivity Research did a fantastic job outlining, saying, this asset in 2021 went up almost 800% from before the pandemic started to the kind of the top of the market.
Yeah.
During that time, there was 30% drawdowns. If you're going to try to get levered long and think that, hey, ETF gets approved and this thing just goes to the moon, you're likely to get shaken out or get liquidated.
Pompliano also addressed reports that crypto investment services provider Matrixport expects that the SEC will reject all spot Bitcoin ETF applications and discuss what would happen to Bitcoin's price if the SEC were to deny or approve those applications.
If they approve it, I think that there will be a lot of short-term volatility, and then we'll kind of get right back on track, whether it goes up or down after the approval. If they reject it, I think the same thing would happen. There would be a lot of kind of short-term volatility, and we'd get right back on track. The beauty is with Bitcoin, if we go back, we saw something like this. China had over 60% of all mining inside of their borders. They completely banned mining and kicked them all out. 50% of the hash rate went offline. By the end of that year, May of 2021 is when it happened. By the end of 2021, mining hash rate was back to an all-time high. And so this thing is just resilient, it's anti-fragile, and it continues to just do what it was designed to do.
Next, CoinDesk reports that Goldman Sachs wants to help BlackRock and Grayscale with their proposed spot Bitcoin ETFs. The banking giant reportedly wants to be an authorized participant, which are firms that help with the creation of shares and the redemption process for ETFs. This report comes about a week after BlackRock and other spot Bitcoin ETF applicants included APs in updated registration forms for their proposals, with JP Morgan and Jane Street named in BlackRock's filing. We reached out to Goldman Sachs and a spokesperson declined to comment. Last, Cathie Wood's ARK Invest sold more than 166,000 Coinbase shares worth more than $25 million from two of its ETFs. The move comes 1 week after ARK sold shares of Coinbase worth more than $27 million and dumped the remainder of its Grayscale holdings. We spoke with Cathie Wood last week, and she said the recent moves to offload millions of dollars worth of Grayscale Bitcoin Trust and Coinbase shares are essentially portfolio management. The change in holdings comes ahead of the much-anticipated decision by the SEC on spot Bitcoin ETFs. The first deadline is for ARK 21 shares, and last week, Wood said that ARK believes the probability of an approval has gone up because the SEC has been, quote, highly engaged compared to what was happening before. All right, for our main story, we're talking all about crypto crime. 2023 was a year of court hearings and sentencings for some of the biggest names in the industry. So as the year was wrapping up, I spoke with Redbord of TRM Labs about Sam Bankman-Fried, CZ, and whether we can expect more crypto-focused trials in 2024.
So I think we have to start this conversation with the Sam Bankman-Fried trial, not because that was an issue specific to crypto. Fraud and conspiracy happen in any business. But I think that case was really held up as putting the entire industry on trial this year. And now that we're a few weeks away from that verdict, what do you think that argument has held up? I mean, where does the crypto industry stand in regard to the SBF trial?
Yeah, look, it's really extraordinary. I think we've talked about this before. Look, none of the fraud in the FTX case occurred on blockchains, right? It occurred in the same places that fraud has occurred for generations, in the sort of opaque quarters of financial institutions, right? The issue, though, is because crypto was involved, it obviously becomes a referendum on cryptocurrency, on the crypto industry. A couple things still stand out to me about the case, though. First and foremost, the speed. right? I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary how quickly this case moved. I mean, it was basically a year ago, right? It was November of last year that FTX collapsed. I mean, when we were just crossing the into 2023, FTX was the story. The collapse of FTX was the story. And to have a guilty verdict at trial when extradition was involved, millions of pages of documents, 3 cooperating witnesses that all had to plead guilty themselves, that all had to, cooperate with the government. So this case moved so quickly. And I would argue in part, it was actually because, prosecutors were able to quickly, understand the evidence in the case, because you had very, very, frankly, good cooperating witnesses, and you had a judge that wanted to move the trial along. And I think from a crypto industry perspective, I think that definitely people are very happy to have this case behind them in 2023, mostly because it created, a regulatory storm, or a storm from policymakers who were using FTX, even though it wasn't about crypto per se, to talk about sort of broader regulation in the industry.
Yeah. I also want to move to Binance, which is sort of perfect to talk about right after SBF because of how closely tied those businesses and those founders were. We're still in progress in that settlement and a potential sentencing for CZ in 2024. But my question is, what's the takeaway from that settlement where the crypto industry's argument is that it can sort of avoid consequences in certain jurisdictions? Does that argument still hold water both now and heading into 2024?
Yeah, look, I think that understanding sort of the ways people have lumped them together, 2 of the largest exchanges of their time and all these sorts of issues, I think they're very, very different cases. And particularly the criminal case involving CZ is very, very different from the criminal case involving Sam Bankman-Fried. First of all, FTX was a house of cards, right? That collapsed, and then a criminal case sort of began. Ultimately, what this settlement allows is for Binance to continue operating, to build compliance controls, and to sort of meet the requirements that are going to be set up for it by the U.S. Treasury and others. So it's, on the one hand, you have the collapse of a cryptocurrency business. Here you have a massive fine, but the ability for the crypto business to build compliance and move forward. From a pure criminal perspective, I spent about 11 years at AUSA as a federal prosecutor, and the cases are really interesting because it shows, on the one hand, where someone did not cooperate, did not accept responsibility, took the government to trial, and denied all responsibility, ultimately lost, and now is staring down the barrel of a very, very long sentence. That's in the SBF case. In the CZ case, you have something entirely different, right? You have lawyers who apparently came in, the defendant came in, met with prosecutors, cooperated with the government, ultimately came to the U.S. willingly from a jurisdiction that would not extradite him likely, and now is looking at a much lesser sentence, if any sort of time served at all. So I say all of that to say, as an AUSA, it is very different to have a defendant that forces the issue than one that cooperated, and the one that cooperated is going to be treated much, much better, especially when you're accepting responsibility, which it seems like he's done in this case, that CZ has done in this case.
Yeah. The one other case that we've been tracking a lot this year is Do Kwon in the Terra Luna case, which precipitated so much of the issues that we saw in 2022 that we're still dealing with in 2023. We just found out recently that the appeal process in his extradition has met a hiccup. It could potentially be delayed. What do you make of the cooperation between jurisdictions, between the U.S. and other countries, in terms of prosecuting these criminal cases, these crypto cases? How much work still needs to be done there to make that work around the world?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the promise of cryptocurrency is this idea of cross-border value transfer at the speed of the internet. But when you're talking about, the criminal justice system, it creates a lot of issues potentially. Interestingly, all 3 of these cases that we're talking about today involve extradition in one way or another. How to go get that individual from another country. You had ultimately Sam Bankman-Fried fight and then eventually waive extradition rather, I think within 24 hours or less. In the Bahamas, obviously you had CZ come willingly to the U.S. from the UAE. And then finally, Do Kwon, who's fighting extradition currently in Montenegro. And the question for him is whether he ends up going to Korea, which has asked for his extradition, or the United States. And we'll kind of see how that plays out. But I think that, look, the nature of cryptocurrency, which is everywhere, it means that you're going to need more and more international cooperation. I will say that you do see that, and you saw it in 2023 in the cases, right? You see so many cases, Hydra and darknet markets, and some of these large treasury actions, DOJ actions. A lot of them involve foreign counterparts. So you're seeing it happen where you're seeing global law enforcement cooperate cross border, but it's still very early, and I think we're going to see more and more of that.
Yeah, a little more forward looking. Do you think prosecutors are headed into the new year feeling more emboldened to take on these crypto businesses or individuals, or maybe take on some of these more complicated cases that require the extradition, that require so much of that research or back end effort? Or are we in a place where it's still uncertain?
I think what's interesting is we're seeing the ecosystem evolve, right? And it's the lawful crypto ecosystem. It's growing. And as the year ends, 2023, I think we're seeing tremendous growth in the space. We're seeing institutions get involved. That means we're going to see more and more crypto in criminal cases, in criminal prosecutions, because bad actors always follow the money. And there's going to be more and more transactions in crypto. What we've seen over the last decade really is a cadre of US and global law enforcement who are tracers, who use tools like TRM to trace and track the flow of funds and build investigations. The Department of Justice today has a national cryptocurrency enforcement team. I think that at some point, every prosecutor is going to need to understand how to track and trace crypto. Every investigator is going to understand how to track and trace crypto, because just like cash, crypto will be in every case. And I think we're just starting to see that. TRM recently did a study with mostly US law enforcement, but globally. And it basically says that we're seeing more and more crypto in cases today. And I think that's a trend that we're going to continue. The IRSCI, one of the most important investigators in the crypto space, just did their sort of top 10, their billboard charts of money laundering crimes in 2023, or money laundering cases. 4 of the top 10 involve cryptocurrency. So the reality is we're seeing more crypto in cases, and prosecutors and law enforcement are needing the tools and the training to track and trace those funds. So to answer your question, I think we're going to see a lot more of this, but we're going to see more and more expertise also from law enforcement.
All right, that's all for Crypto World today, but we'll be back again tomorrow with analysis on what prompted this week's crypto price swings, and we'll see you then.